If you own your crypto and you own your keys, no government could take it away from you. No entity could take it away from you. No one can rob you and take your money because your keys are in your head.
When did you get to a place where you said, this is something I want to get involved in?
When I figured out that in order for the world to continue to spin, every single government has to continue to print money for the show to go on, was the light bulb moment where I realized Bitcoin's the only answer. Michael Saylor, one of the gurus in the space, has mapped out a mathematical plan that shows that this will perform 30% a year over the next 20 years. My belief is we'll see $1 million a coin in less than 5 years.
You could have millions in the bank, and if you don't have your health, you know, you're miserable.
I was 250 pounds and definitely not in the best physical form. She literally pulled me aside, and after doing the first round of blood work, she said, you're gonna die. Once I started to hate the medical system, I realized, oh my God, our food system's poisoned too. And what most people don't understand about Bitcoin that I wanna bring home,
Welcome everybody to season 3 of Pro to Pro. I want to thank all our followers and all our supporters. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. We took season 3 to the road. We're actually at our podcast guest home right now in Atlanta, Georgia, and we're super excited to bring to you his episode and all the upcoming episodes for Pro to Pro. Thanks again for your support, and remember, keep it Pro to Pro.
Pro to Pro, let's get it, let's grow. Game time talk for the ones who know. From hustle to vision, we breaking it down. Still for the top, then remember the name. Pro to Pro.
Welcome everybody to another edition of Pro to Pro. I'm here with my friend Jesse. Jesse, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I am super stoked with Jesse because Jesse's going to talk about so many things that I hardly know anything about, and I'm sure that you guys may have some knowledge about it, but Jesse's a wealth of information in these areas, and we're going to talk crypto. But before we get to crypto, we always like to kind of unravel the onion, so to speak, with our guests and go back in time to kind of see how you evolved to where you are now. And I have an understanding in part because I got to meet you a little bit because you're friends with my wife. You've had an incredible physical transformation and mental transformation, I think, too, with
Thanks to your wife.
With
your
Kristen.
wife saved my life. I mean, let's start there. I was 250 pounds and definitely not in the best physical form I could be in before she started to work with me. So that was your
that was your worst, huh?
That was my worst.
Huh?
250. But I mean, listen, the weight could be deceiving because there was no muscle mass involved in that 250. It was terrible diet, terrible way of life, just,
excess, right?
Excess everything.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll touch on it later on the podcast, but I was dealing with some issues because, at the time, my wife was, the breadwinner, and as the man of the household was a really tough pill for me to swallow, being everything that I've done up to that point. So there was definitely some maturing and growing that I had to do to.
But we as men go through that in period, especially if we have a spouse or a partner that's killing it, or just in general, we go and hunt. We're supposed to be the ones who go and make the money. So it can be really ego shaking depending upon the circumstance. But let's go back a little, because I went through the same. I went through a 40-pound transformation with my wife when she worked me up as well. So I mean, I love it being where I am now. But go back a little. I had a chance to meet your brother too. You guys are obviously close. So talk a little bit about where you were raised and how your child life was up through school and getting you out here.
Absolutely. So I was lucky. I had a super cool childhood. My family owned one of the most famous music stores in the time. I mean, I'm 35, not to date myself, but you're talking 80s baby here. And, I grew up in New York City. My family owned Manny's Music, which was located in the heart of Times Square, right on Music Row and 48th Street. Yeah. Super cool. They own the building. So I spent most of my time running around there as a box boy in the basement, just doing errands for my dad. And obviously this is, catalog days where brick and mortars used to be, everything,
it was the LPs. It was the LPs.
pre-internet day, you know, I would walk into the store, my dad, the store would be packed wall to wall with people, you know, and it's just because, you know, back then, before the so-called influencer days, part of, you know, my family's claim to fame was they would have a lot of famous people in the store constantly. Like, you know, there's stories on how my grandfather lent Jimi Hendrix one of his first guitars on the arm just for playing in the store before he got big.
Wow.
The Who played at my dad's bar mitzvah, you know.
Amazing.
Wild. Yeah, super cool stuff. So I got to grow up in that arena and just kind of see the good life from a young age.
And did you grow up in Manhattan?
Yep, Upper West Side.
Wow.
Yep,
okay.
Home base. Now, granted, you know, we had moved to Connecticut, you know, shortly when I was like 7, 8 years old. And then from there, you know, that was right around, you know, right around the time my dad started having, you know, some business issues with the store. I mean, it was a, you know, 4th generation business. So there was a lot of hands in the pot at that point.
So when you say 4th generation, so great-great-grandfather? It just kept going.
Great-great-grandfather.
Oh,
Great-grandfather.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's who the store was named after, obviously, you know.
So 1800s.
Yeah, big time. Big time. And, you know, I mean, obviously not relative to this podcast, but like, you know, they started the business by loaning out instruments to all the different boroughs. So like all the people who couldn't afford it in the Bronx and Brooklyn at the time, they created kind of a loan program so people could get their hands on instruments. Obviously it was a, you know, depressing time back then. So music kind of was the tool that got people together, and Manny's built their whole business around that.
Well, you obviously, you got influenced unbeknownst to yourself,
for sure,
with regard to entrepreneurism.
Exactly.
What was going on with your dad, and your grandfather. You were raised in the environment, period,
for sure.
Right? Feast or famine, whatever 100%. It was, right?
No, and you know, to make it even more entertaining, you know, my mother and my father couldn't be two polar opposites. My mother, you know, grew up in a very tough situation. She was, you know, had a really rough go as a kid, came from no money at all. So I got to kind of see my mother, how she acted when she first started to get money, which was also a huge learning lesson for me, you know, to see just how people interact like that. Because my dad, the other side, they've had money their whole life and were the exact opposite. Never really talked about it, very quiet, you know, very humble, so to speak. So I did get to see both sides.
Do you think you lived a privileged childhood?
Definitely, without a doubt. With that being said, though, I am a product of 2008, you know, giving my age. And at that point in my life, you know, we had lost it all. It was a complete reset. You know, parents had gotten divorced. At that time, we had moved out to California in an attempt to relaunch Manny's one more time on the West Coast, which ended up being, you know, a failure. And then at that point, you know, my mom and dad just couldn't do it anymore. So my dad had moved back to New York City, and my mom had moved us to where she was from, where she had grown up, which wasn't the most pleasant area.
Where was that?
West Haven, Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
Which I say, you know, at the time, you know, given everything I had seen up to that point, for me was a worst case scenario. You know, I'd come from a beautiful school where everything was outside to a high school that had bars on the windows and you had to walk through metal detectors. So at that age of my life, I was definitely rebelling a little bit. Didn't have.
And you have a younger brother.
Youngest.
So just 2 of you?
No, 3 of us. We have a middle sister.
Okay. You're the oldest.
Yep, oldest.
Okay.
Warrior of the group.
Yeah.
You know, so I played more of the protective role as a kid just because we had moved so much. And, you know, obviously I had my little sister and my little brother who both were unbelievable athletes. And for me at that time was kind of, you know, I felt my goal was just to kind of protect them and shield them from everything that was going on within our family.
And so the transition with the moving and all that, were your teenage years?
Yeah, well, I went to, even before that, I mean, started at 7 from when we moved to Connecticut. Then we moved from Connecticut to California. I mean, I had 3 different middle schools and 2 different high schools.
So that's got to be tough for growing up.
But it teaches you some skills, though.
Yeah,
you know, my ability to adapt
and adapt, right?
Well, you know, I say at the time, and me and my wife joke about this all the time, you know, because she said if I had to move at that age, I would have, you know, I would have moved out. There's no way I was moving that. And I remember that feeling as a kid when they tell you have to move schools. Once you get in with your friends, it really does feel like the end of the world. But looking back at it now, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. you know, like my ability to, you know, go into new places, be fearless, make friends, show my personality. You know, there was no mystery. I mean, by the third school, I was like, I got this.
Yeah,
I could do it all over again.
Yeah.
Any day of the week. So, you know, it gave me that confidence that helped me later on in life, especially when it came time for college and to get into the workforce and start to make a name for myself.
So what was it as far as interest-wise did you enjoy and as far as like school for college and things like that? Did you have anything in particular that you were focused on?
No, for most of my life, I was led to believe that I was going to take over the family business, so didn't think I needed to.
Oh, wow, yeah.
One of those, you know, and then obviously, like we said, 2008 was a wake-up call for everyone and realized there was no more family business and it's sink or swim. So, you know, from that point on, you know, at that age, it's kind of hard to process, but, you know, took it one step at a time and here we are.
So where did you end up going to school?
University of Tampa.
Okay, so you were down here. Is college what brought you here to begin with?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, reluctantly, if we're just being honest, I mean, I didn't have the best grade point average in high school, wasn't really too focused on school, more of a sports guy. So University of Tampa, believe it or not, back then was one of the only schools that would take my grade point average. Luckily enough, it worked out perfectly. It was one of the most beautiful schools there was. Yeah. It was super fun. And so I was.
So what degree did you end up getting in?
International business.
So international business.
Yep.
So you finish up with that. Do you go work for somebody or do you automatically do something on your own?
Yeah, no. So my first job was with a local business entrepreneur, Herschel Bentley. He took me under his wing and, you know, we started, he was running a company called US Student Loan Center, which was pretty much student loan modification. Which I don't know if you guys understand the way the student loan process works. The government pretty much funds the loan and then you make an agreement to pay them back based off of your income as you graduate and you're able to. So there was a lot of different programs and things built into that allowed you to finagle the system based off of your income. And we would just obviously find those solutions for our clients. With that being said, you know, it wasn't a very high paying job. You know, I was very good at it because it was sales, it was over the phone, but it was very short-lived. So I actually went into his office with only working there 3-4 weeks after breaking every sales record there and said, you know, Herschel, I really appreciate the opportunity. The money's just not where I need it to be. Unfortunately, I need to take my talents elsewhere. And he said, shut the door. And he said, you're not going anywhere. We're going to do something with you. And I said, all right, what are we going to do? And he actually presented to me a company called getoutofdebt.com, which was a spin-off of US Student Loan Center, but it was pretty much, you know, consumer debt settlement. So people with credit card debt, people with, you know, outstanding loans that they couldn't pay. What you're able to do as, you know, a company is we're able to negotiate a 50% settlement for most of these clients and capture 25% of that fee as a retainer.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that was my first real introduction to entrepreneurial.
And equity stake as well?
Yeah, whole nine.
And so what are you, 20, 21?
23.
23 at the time?
Yeah.
So you got bit.
Yeah, I got bit. And you know, it's funny because that exact example, that exact situation is what led me to find crypto. So through our journey of building getoutofdebt.com, which was a lot harder, you know, a lot harder than it seemed to be. Like I was thinking at the time, I think credit card debt was, you know, just under $1 trillion. I'm like, this is going to be like shooting fish in a barrel.
Mm-hmm,
you know, I was already thinking, where am I going to put all this cash?
Mm-hmm.
Ended up not being the way because the downside to debt settlement is you have to talk the client into defaulting on their credit cards, which in turn negatively affects their credit. Mm-hmm. But the upside is if you don't have the cash flow to pay off that 24% credit card interest, you are in a hamster wheel of debt for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But because of the way society was built, explaining to the clients, especially the older generation, that you have to default and take a hit on your credit score to be able to
get a fresh
fix
start,
this problem was a lot harder than I expected it to be. But the silver lining in all of that was we actually had partnered in hopes of expanding with a company called Consumer First Financial out of Clearwater. And I won't say his name for his privacy, but you know, this guy was as smart as it gets, and I became a huge fan of him. Still one of my mentors to this day. Talk to him weekly. At the time, this was 2017. He was mining Ethereum in the IT closet.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
So, me being a sales guy, had a sales floor in his office of about 25 people. You know. And we were just strictly pushing debt settlement. But while I was in the day-to-day struggle of getting deals, I kept hearing a dinging noise out of the IT closet. And I was like, what is that? And he was like, man, it's complicated, but one day if you got some time, I'll walk you through it. And I kind of just brush it off like, you know, we'll circle back. A couple months go by, hear the ding a couple times a day. And I was like, all right, I'm intrigued. Tell me what it is. And so he was mining Ethereum. And at the time, Ethereum was a foreign concept. Nobody knew what it was, even me. I was like, I had known Bitcoin, but my introduction to Bitcoin was from 2010 because it was built around that Silk Road's online website that was strictly designed for people to do illegal activity. So my initial condensation of Bitcoin in the entire cryptocurrency space was negative.
Yeah,
I had no positive.
I think a lot of people still to this day have that
For sure.
feeling or understanding of it. So let me back up because our listeners and followers who may not know anything about Bitcoin, may not know anything about this whole idea of mining, me included to an extent as well. So what exactly is mining? What was he doing? What does that mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, you have a series of computers that complete a mathematical problem, right? That validate, you know, back then it was proof of stake for Ethereum. And it would obviously do a bunch of things from a mathematical standpoint to validate the network. And you would reward you with Ethereum for doing that. So it was pretty much a way to generate, you know,
passive income.
Passive income. I mean, again, when most of these crypto guys, especially back then, though, the interesting part is never had the intent to sell. They always had the long-term goal of saying, hey, I'm going to accumulate this till the end of time.
Is that because there's only a finite amount of it?
Well, not Ethereum. So
Okay.
that's where the journey began for me, you know, to understand the difference between Ethereum. Because, you know, in 2017 was the beginning of that first real bull run where everybody kind of became acquainted to, you know, cryptocurrency in some way, shape, or form. You know, we talked about it briefly in the start, like XRP's been around since then. There's been a bunch of them. But however, you know, Ethereum is one of the ones that, you know, it's actually went through a couple changes and variations where they've altered the way it works and the way it functions. So obviously, if we're looking at today's current price of Ethereum, I think that would explain why it's been having some issues, because they have adjusted and altered their main business model multiple times. That does in some way, shape, or form affect the trust of the so-called cryptocurrency consumer. But again, obviously, you know, we have the government backing Ethereum now, so there is still huge potential for upside.
So I guess that our podcast, you know, we could dive deep. We could have hours and days on crypto in and of itself. And I don't want to go too deep in it, but, you know, I will hopefully be able to borrow you, get you again, and we could do a lot more, especially as I build out this collective. But with regard to Bitcoin in general and demystifying that whole understanding and the fact, the negative connotations that you were talking about, when did you get to a place where you said, this is something I want to get involved in?
For sure. Well, obviously, you know, when I first been introduced to it, it took me a couple months to come around to it. And then I was like, all right, I'm in, you know, just because I was making money. My wife was making decent money at the time, nowhere near what she's doing today. But it was just one of the things, like, as a casual investor, I said, why not? And it ended up being one of the best decisions I've ever made. But I didn't do the work. You know, that was just me copycatting somebody else's mindset and opinion towards a specific asset. Once I joined and jumped in and studied cryptocurrency, from that point on, I became a BTC maxi and changed my entire portfolio from everything other cryptocurrency into one cryptocurrency, and that's Bitcoin.
So you use the term BTC Maxi.
Yeah.
Does that mean what it sounds like it means?
Yeah, it means that, and you know, I think just to be fair to your viewers, because they don't have the backstory we do. You know, I'm in the position, thankfully, to be able to, you know, where my wife does really well, right? Out of nowhere, for everybody that's viewing, you know, my wife was in a position where she was one of the first people that brought network marketing to Instagram. So within that time frame, I would say from 2018, 2019, she started to gain some serious momentum.
Well, let's back up, because I definitely want to talk about your wife.
Yeah.
It's incredible, the story with you guys, but we talk on the podcast all the time about the importance of picking the right person in the relationship and growing together, and just how crucial not only the vetting process is, but the time it takes to get to know each other and have that person become your best friend. Because at the end of the day, that person has to be your best friend.
For sure.
And I've made numerous mistakes. I'm great now, 15 plus years with my wife, and thank God I got another chance.
She's the best.
But so how did you meet your wife?
In college. So I met, and you know, it's super cool story. I met her my first semester, first week, first girl I ever met. Was from an actual friend, a friend who I went to high school with, came down to visit me, said he knew a girl that he wanted to hang out with. He called her, she brought her.
Oh my gosh.
And it was history ever since.
Your freshman year?
Freshman year.
So how did you manage to stay and not deviate, or maybe deviate a little bit and come back?
No, there was no deviating. I mean, listen, my wife, for better or for worse, knew exactly what she wanted the day we met. And you know, if we go back to my story, you know, I was significantly flawed human being, you know, given the fact that, you know, I'd witnessed divorce in my household. You know, I had, you know, when you see that at 13 years old, like the last thing you're ever thinking is, I'm going to get married too.
So you were very guarded.
Very guarded, very guarded. You know, it was just one of those things where when your life falls apart like that at that age, and it may have felt worse than it was just because I wasn't as emotionally developed at that age. It did feel like the end of the world, you know, like, because everything, you know, as far as the way your family operates becomes divided, you know, and it's just, you know, part of the game, I guess. But I remember saying, once I transitioned after the divorce to like, I'm going to protect my brother and sister, that's my only goal. Love was the last thing on my mind.
So you didn't, that's really interesting, especially as a guy. So you made a conscious decision that you didn't want to deal like that noise, so to speak, with women and chasing girls. And, you know, guys go through this all the time. You know, they're going out, they're going to bars, they want to get laid. They want to, I mean, that's what happens in college. You know what? I mean, that's all that goes on. So you made a conscious decision when you were, you don't want to deal with that. And you know what's funny about it is that I tend to get spiritual sometimes. Yeah. My wife would wish I was more spiritual, but I do believe that some things reveal itself to you. And by you making that decision, God reveals your wife.
For sure. Well, you know, if you're not looking for it, it comes to you, right? All my friends that do really well, that are searching for love, always have the hardest time finding it. Yeah. Because in my mind, whatever it being, or whatever caused me to think that way, I was so set internally that I was never going to get married. I was never going to, you know, lock down with one girl. And I just had thought to myself, like, who would put themselves through that pain, you know? Because like,
and I went through the pain twice, and I said to myself, I said to myself after the second time, I said, I'm done. Because 3 times you're done, I'm done. Yeah. And then I met my wife. I was like, oh my gosh, no. But you know, we both didn't want to get married, and then we both ended up.
I wasn't even man enough to get the experience. I just got the front row.
I don't know if it's man or stupidity, frankly.
No, you know, it is though. I mean, because look at what you guys have done. It's
now,
stuff. You guys
it's awesome now. It's awesome now. But so that I love these love stories. Yeah, because this is the behind the scenes on the program that I just love to hear and share. So you meet her. You kind of know that she must have really took it to you. She must have
for starters, she's absolutely stunning. You know, I mean, it's very easy to love her. Yeah. But I mean, time obviously it tells all. And here we are. We've been together 15 years. When I tell my friends and family that, you know, this is coming up on our 15-year anniversary, it's like, whoa, where did the time go? But yeah, I mean, you know, she's great, and she comes from a perfect family. She's never seen any of the things I've seen growing up. So it was just two different worlds, you know? And for me, just giving, like I said, a little tidbit to like how my mom used to operate. And when I moved to that town, West Haven, as a kid, being 13 years old, of seeing what it was like to have money before that, and then being in a town that has no money. The coincidence of it all was in that town, everybody talked about money more than I had ever seen in my life. Like every adult based their whole ego around money. It was my first kind of school of hard knocks exposure to how adults interact with money. Because I'd never seen people really talk about money other than my mother before that time. Because my dad, who had money,
it was quiet,
never talked about it.
And most people who have money generally are quiet.
Exactly.
But for the internet and everybody waving, you know, half of it's fake or whatever.
You start talking about these blue collar Italians, man, they talk like billionaires, you know? And as a kid, it's exciting to hear, you know, I looked up to a lot of these guys, you know, like, cause I believed everything an adult told me, you know, at that age. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to have that confidence, especially because I remember, you know, at that point, not having money, you know, because, you know, I was more worried about protecting the money my mom got from the divorce at the time and making sure, you know, we still had, you know, food on the table because, you know, she had her own flaws as far as spending and issues.
So you had to grow up fast.
Real fast, you know. But again, best thing that ever happened, because by the time I got to college, I mean, you know, my wife will tell you, I showed up to school 18 years old with $100,000 in a backpack ready to go.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were kind of like beyond your years in some respects from a responsibility perspective,
for
predicated on what you went through.
For sure.
So you were ready, like with regard to your wife. So she probably also saw in you, you know, something special, obviously.
Yeah.
And so you guys, you go through school together. This advent, I know off camera that she immersed herself in different business ventures at a time. Where, you know, social media, she got involved in social media and stuff. So talk a little bit about that and how you dealt with it.
So her story, and I'm going to tell it for her, and she's going to be mad. But
well, we'll get her. I think I'm going to get her on the program too.
Perfect. So she was working for a company called NextSec, and she was making great money. I mean, out of college.
Is that a network marketing company?
No, it was a software sales company.
Okay.
For the medical field. I don't know exactly the ins and outs, but it was some sort of software that every hospital needed. So I would mess with her because she, you know, it was a couple $100,000 a year out of college.
Sales?
Yeah, sales. And, you know, I would mess with her because, again, we were competitive. And I was like, it's not really sales, darling, because the companies need to use their software by law. So I don't know where the sale is there.
So they're captive.
Yeah, literally, they have no choice but to buy from you. But what ended up happening is the company was actually purchased by a private equity firm called the Francisco Partners. And what they did was she had worked on a deal for a year that I think, you know, don't quote me, but I think it turned out to be like $30,000 or $40,000 in commission on that one deal that she'd worked for a year. So unfortunately, she had worked it during the company was acquiring their company NextTech. So when it came time to pay out, they had no intention of paying out. They were like, that's the old company, the old guard. And my wife, being the, you know, spicy Latina that she is, marched right into that office and said, you either pay me or I'm out. And me being the conservative at the time, you know, a person.
What are you doing?
When she came home and told me she quit, I said, Jacqueline.
Oh, so she did it?
Oh, she walked immediately. Didn't even hesitate. I said, Jacqueline, please walk back in there and apologize. Say you had an episode, okay? Whatever we need to do to get that income back, go back.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, she's like, no, I won't. And I was like, okay, Jacqueline, like, you know, I think you need help. You know, you should talk to somebody because I don't know where we're going to find that money in today's market right now. And she was like, I'll find it. Don't worry. So.
Is that the dynamic? Did you just share with us the dynamic of the relationship to this day?
100%. So I mean that was the beginning of kind of where, you know, I say her success was my biggest karma, because in my defense, because of the way she exited her previous company, I was going to hate anything she did next. And what she did next was network marketing, which I had no idea even existed. I mean, I'm old school. This was right when Instagram first came out, right? And she was always taking photos of our food and our vacations and all this stuff. And I thought it was silly, you know? I just come from that whole philosophy, like, don't show, don't tell. You know, like, if you're doing well, keep it private, you know, take care
Like how you originally, when you were raised younger.
Exactly. Well, because again, just to touch back to my upbringing, you know, I had two complete polar opposites. I had, you know, my dad who was, you know, kept it quiet and lived a great life behind the scenes, never needed to show off to anyone. And I had my mom who just wanted to let everybody know what we were doing all the time, you know? And I saw how, you know, a lot of that talk can bring the wrong people into your network, you know, and my mom being the social person she was, definitely let a lot of people get close to us that, you know, through the years you find out have malintentions, you know? So it's just this, you know, school of hard knocks. You learn, you know, that, you know, human capital is one of the most flawed forms of capital. So, you know, what we'll lead into, which is why I'm such a BTC maxi, because I don't have to deal with people's malicious emotions or intents trying to, you know, benefit themselves when it comes to our interaction with money. But like I said, so, you know, I was old school. She didn't, you know, I was kind of against her posting, you know, and then like she was, you know, a genius in the marketing sense of the first person to actually bring lifestyle attraction marketing to her business. And this was before she even had money, you know? So she was, you know, like acting using our vacations and our lifestyle as a way to promote her new business venture.
So she had this vision.
Yeah.
Like ahead of time. Like
way ahead of time.
So this is when? Where this 2017?
No. Yeah, 19 maybe or 18. I forget. Right
Somewhere
when
around
she
that
started.
range.
Yeah, right.
I don't remember when Instagram originally started because I didn't get involved until later.
Yeah, no, I mean, Instagram started in 2012, but she had like started to promote our lifestyle the second she had jumped ships from that previous company to the new network marketing company. And like for me, similar to how I was first introduced to cryptocurrency, I was first introduced to network marketing the same way as your old mom and pop, Mary Kay line.
Yeah, Tupperware maybe, or all these other things. You know, it's a pyramid type mindset, right? So it's got a negative, you have probably thought of it negatively as well.
Sure.
Okay.
For sure. And again, you know, she had left a very high paying job. So I was being spiteful saying, this is never going to get to that. Fast forward, you know, just to get to you guys to the conclusion. Oh, it got to that. You know, she passed that.
She's killing it.
Yeah. I mean, she's done close to 20 million bucks in, you know, a couple of years.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
So she had the vision.
She had the vision. And she has the drive. She's a worker. I mean, she has a, I don't know if we're allowed to curse on here. She has she has a no bullshit approach to working. She's a grinder.
But she's passionate about it.
Literally.
You know, she's passionate about it, and she's also authentic.
Yeah.
And people obviously see it, and it comes through from a business perspective.
And, you know, part of understanding her as her husband, I realized she works a lot better when she's pissed off. So that first company, you know, doing what they did to her over that commission, put a fire under her ass that made her know that, like, whatever she did next, she was coming for it all.
You know what I think happens to us as humans, especially those that eventually go the entrepreneur route? There are events that can occur one way or the other to, you know, different people, you know, based on their experiences that are the catalyst for change.
Yeah.
I remember for me, because I kind of bounced back and forth, having my own practice, working with partners, going to work for a big company, coming back. And I even remember a couple instances in which I went to a big company thinking I had a contract, thought I planned the future, was vice president in this company, had everything in my mind, planning it out, everything, contract, everything lined up, had to give up my book of business and my own firm, didn't necessarily want to do this. And I said, I was trying to think ahead that, okay, if something happens, I'll have this agreement in place, whatever. Fast forward, you're expendable like anything else.
Literally.
And I remember that moment and they didn't renew my contract. And I remember that moment and I was like, I'll never let this happen to me again. I will be my own boss. I will steer my own ship. And so it sounds to me that your wife went through something similar. And a lot of people go through that. Some people, like, you're kind of fortunate in that you knew early on. Yeah. You didn't want to be accountable to anybody but yourself, your family. But some people, it takes a little longer, whatever it may be. And there's so many people now watching this or are listening to us that are vacillating as to what to do because of that fear of, oh my gosh, what am I going to do if I leave? Yeah. You know, or they got the golden handcuffs. For sure. And they're locked to a mortgage, a car payment, all this other stuff. So I love this story because this is obviously she worked her ass off to get where she was, but she had this aha moment to move forward.
No, and if she was here, she'd be screaming from a rooftop because I've definitely downplayed how much of an asshole I was to her in the beginning.
Well, you're Mr. Conservative.
Yeah, literally.
Really, for your whole. See, this is the other thing we talk about on the platform. You need to understand you as a person dealing with money and your emotional approach to money and your spouses or your partners.
For sure.
People in relationships, they wait to have that conversation. And I don't know why. I was talking to my wife about it. She had a friend, they were talking as well, and the friend was sharing with them, well, he doesn't want to talk about money, or she doesn't want to talk. I go, they've been together for like 4 years. When are they going to talk? They're not married and they don't want to talk about money. Why aren't they going to talk about money? Well, what is it? They can just put their head in the sand and not talk about money? Who's paying this? Who's doing that? It makes no sense.
Yeah.
At least get an understanding. I know my wife, she shared with me when she was young, she'd come home and the power would be out.
Yeah.
And she'd like, why is the power out? She'd be living with her dad. She went through a divorce with her family.
Yeah.
Why is the power out, Pop? And he bought this $10,000 piece of art, but he didn't pay for the lights. So with her, she's very conservative.
Yeah.
I have to know that.
For sure.
So you went through this with your wife. And so this battle goes on. And I know we'll talk about, how it continues to go on.
To this day. To this day. If we check my phone, I'm sure there's some battles just by sitting here.
Yes. So clearly she's doing what she's doing. But how did that affect you as far as how you had to accommodate your expectations in the relationship?
Yeah, well, a lot of eating crow. I got served a nice dose of humble pie for sure. Because again, like being in that toxic, masculinity mindset through all of high school, I was that way.
You were the boss.
The boss.
You were the little man who grew up quick
for sure
to run the family, basically. So that you had to now sit back a little bit.
Yeah. One of the things, I didn't really understand was when we had money in college and Jack still had to work, I was like, why are you working? Our lifestyle is great. Like, should I have student loans, And I was like, I was so frustrated by her willingness to do things outside of me because I wanted to be the sole provider.
We do that, men. We want to provide and protect.
Super insecure too, because it took some maturing to understand that. But I had, found myself at University of Tampa where I had thought I was the big dick. And then I had realized I'm not. There's kids with a lot more than me, with a lot more backing, with families with a lot more money. So I had to adapt my approach to be like, all right, how am I going to get to the top of this now? Because I do want to be the richest and the strongest at that time. Not so much anymore, but
you had to drive
for sure.
And you needed to figure out, and that's important too, though, because, you had to recognize that, oh, all right, I'm not the biggest. I'm not the best. I got a lot of competition. And that's what's going on in life today, especially with the younger generation. They get coddled.
Yeah.
This soft parenting shit that goes on, all this other stuff that goes on. Life's tough.
Yeah.
So you figure it out. I got to go and fight. But you were raised in an environment where the man is the person who, takes care of the family, provides.
Yeah.
Yes, it's ego-driven. Of course, there's an ego part of it, but it's also in our freaking testosterone. It is who we are as men.
Yep.
And I'm not afraid to say that. And, we got lost with all the shit that went on the past couple of years, but I'm glad things are coming back. But with that said, you have a very dynamic relationship with your wife because she does very well. I have a very similar relationship. What I say, and a lot of the people that come on the podcast who are successfully married, it's alpha.
Yeah.
We got alpha relationships. So how do you deal with your alpha?
Yeah, well, I tried to put together a plan to kick her butt back, and that's how I came across all of this. I mean, it started, the second she started to really, strap into her rocket ship, I realized I was in big trouble and had to make some.
So she made you better.
Play ball, yes.
She basically made you say, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm going to do better.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I was in a rough place when she first took off, because it was very clear very early on, I was not going to catch her within the next couple years, I mean, if we're allowed to talk numbers, she was doing $500,000 a month liquid.
Wow.
And for me, we were at a rocky time in our relationship. We weren't even engaged yet. We had been together, I think, 9 years at that point. She was,
what kept you guys from getting married at that?
Me.
Too young?
Me.
Because of the whole relationship of what you would see.
Yeah, we had dated for 9 years and I was like, I'm never getting married. Like I have no intent of getting married.
Did you have any fear of losing her? Like she would leave you?
Well, she says now, obviously, it was very easy for you to get engaged when I started making money, which to her point, obviously, that was a factor, like her making money and contributing to the house. I think all relationships need to have that dialogue,
Absolutely.
Yeah. But now she gets the beautiful joy of throwing that back in my face, So it works two ways because I was, really masculinely aggressive and saying, you're never going to catch me. You're never going to touch the money that I'm going to touch, to realizing the real reality that I might never touch the money she touches.
Yeah.
And it was a hard pill to swallow.
That's a hell of a skew. I mean, that's
hell
big,
of a skew.
That's a big one.
And like as she loves me, she's such a nice person, but the amount of stuff I put her through, arguments, she had a laundry list of stuff to give back to me when it was due. Which again, brought me here to this day because I had to start to figure out a game plan to be able to put myself in the arena. And I had done just about everything I thought I could possibly do, to get me there, but missed the biggest one, which was Bitcoin. And by miss, obviously I didn't miss because I had a significant amount of Bitcoin back then. But obviously, if I would have allocated all of my time and effort and resources into Bitcoin,
well, that's life, right?
Three richest
The
guys,
regrets, right?
shoulda, woulda, and coulda.
Exactly.
Those guys are loaded. But it was simply due to my own fault because I didn't do the work. Because I had written it off because of my introduction to the space. I never really thought.
So many people had. I did too.
To this day, I mean, there's, a lot of my mentors, still aren't even in the space and they have the money to be, because, they believe for whatever reason that it's, short term. But when you really study it, and obviously we'll circle back on this again when we really dive into the topic, when you really study it and put in the time, and I'll leave you with the one golden nugget. When I figured out that in order for the world to continue to spin, every single government has to continue to print money for the show to go on, was the light bulb moment where I realized Bitcoin's the only answer. And that's the reason why you could see today, where
they're kind of trying to move to a different place.
Sound money has to be the basis of our
existence
economy. A global economy where it's no longer America only anymore. It needs to be a global solution in order for us to hit, maximize our interaction from a civilization.
So we try not to get into politics on the platform, but at the end of the day, even though I'm such a staunch believer in America and the ability for America to create jobs in America, do things in America, I do believe that holistically, the world can all benefit from focusing not only on their particular country, but everybody working together and doing different things with the flow of commerce.
100%.
So I guess it's with tariffs and all the stuff going on, everybody's got a different rabbit hole they want to go down and talk about it. But the concept behind Bitcoin and the understanding for people, just again, a sixth grader's view of it, is essentially a uniform ability to have money, basically,
it's
right?
a protocol. It's the first mathematically proven form of sound money, right? And it's deflationary. It's a fixed amount. There's only 21 million Bitcoin. A couple million more already lost. People that in the early days
lost their
had
wallets
their keys.
or whatever I hear.
They don't have that exact number of how much is lost, but again, regardless, even if none were lost, it will tell you that if our existing economy continues to operate the way it has for the last 100 years, that Bitcoin will continue to go up over time. And it's the same thing as real estate. That's the exact reason why your house continues to grow with the money supply, right? Real estate is correlated with that same M2 money supply from a global perspective, right? But I want to back up 1 second just to explain to the viewers, because part of my education into Bitcoin stemmed from me having extensive portfolios in every sector, right? I mean, we started off once we hit the ground running with her business to be a real estate family.
Because we hear, right? That's what we hear about, right? That the real estate is the safe investment. It's go-to. Yeah.
Go-to for generational wealth, right? And I will say, I don't so much agree with that to this day. Now, I think time and, I think scarcity and location is most important when you're talking real estate. But with all the work I've done on Bitcoin, everything in my being believes that Bitcoin will eat the majority of real estate capital in the future. That's not scarce and desirable, right? I don't think my condo in Hyde Park Village is going to have any issues because I think that's the go-to area around here. But if I had a single family in Ocala, I'd be a little bit worried about what that's going to do in the next 20 years. You know what I'm saying? But, just to backtrack, like as a multifamily guy that has a pretty cool portfolio, I was able to see all of the flaws associated with that sector, right? And, I make this joke. I don't own any of the real estate. It owns me. I work for it.
They talk about that in the real estate sector. You own doors, basically.
Exactly.
And you're servicing debt with the doors and
you're servicing people.
And you're servicing
humans.
people, yeah.
And I'm a sucker, I have a big heart. I mean, I find tenants in tough situations and work out deals, but then you find out they're always untruthful and their own end game is always to benefit themselves. So every time I've ever done a backdoor handshake deal to help somebody out, it's always come back to burn me.
Yeah.
And again, I like to, say, hey, listen, I'll take that risk every day because I want to believe in people moving forward. But Bitcoin's never proven me any issues like that.
There's no subjectivity associated with it.
Well, then let me do you one better. So at the peak of my wife, and we say it's about Bitcoin. Bitcoin's on a need to know basis, right? Unless you have a need to know, you're really not interested with it. And obviously outside of having a couple Bitcoin, prior to my wife really hitting the ground running, I didn't have a need to know until my wife started bringing in that kind of money, right? Because the problem then is when you start working as a team, how do we use this money to work for us? And what is the best way to do so?
So let's just briefly go a little bit back to the concept of money itself.
Yeah.
Because, for the most part, my entrepreneurs, the people that are going to be in the collective, money is kind of, it's just this disposable thing. Once you get money, you cover your roof over your house, you got your financial, you got some money in the bank or whatever, it's done at that point. People chase it. And then there's this issue of buying things and things are going to make you happy. No, things are not going to make you happy. No. And that's the whole concept behind our program as well, that holistically you'll find happiness because you could have millions in the bank. And if you don't have your health, you're miserable. And there's a lot of people who are listening and watching this show recognize that, why am I freaking numb? I'm still numb, but yet I took care of my family. I got money in the bank. They have a house. All my kids are in college, but I'm still numb. Why am I numb? Well, because you didn't take care of yourself and you're not taking care of yourself.
For sure.
But you got what you touch upon, to me, this idea that collectively you took care of all that other stuff and you go, all right, what am I going to do analytically? You said, what am I going to do with this? Because I want to be methodical about my portfolio and I want to be thoughtful about this process. And you're in, let's just say you're protecting yourself because your relationship with money, but you also want to advance the ability to derive generational wealth, for lack of a better term, right?
No, absolutely. Spot on. And like I said, to even go back further than that, when I told you about my parents, right? So my dad has used the same money manager out of New York, out of UBS. Her name's Liz Dean, and she's been with my family since 1960 something. And I've had a front row seat to the traditional money managers in finance and how they operate and how they accumulate wealth for their clients. And me as being a kid that's money hungry and obviously, committed, I watched and learned everything she did. And I realized there's got to be something better for my age group because 10% a year doesn't cut it. I think they just came out with the stat yesterday that showed that, the US dollar has decreased by 23% in value since 2020.
Wow.
So, I mean, again, thanks for the
Talk about
10% a year.
Yeah, talk about the hamster wheel.
Literally, thanks for the 10% a year, but I'm barely breaking even here.
Mm-hmm.
And not to mention, like, obviously, now, don't get me wrong. Am I going to pull my money out of this? No, because, I do believe in being diversified at some aspect. And I have the luxury to be able to be diversified because me and Jacqueline both play the game. You know, me, myself, with everything I do, Bitcoin to the moon. I mean, every cash flowing business I have, I convert into BTC, period, point blank. Everything my wife does, obviously she's got a pretty cool Bitcoin collection too, thanks to me. But everything that, she does on the side is part of her more, conservative approach to finance, which I understand and I like to have as well. But to even, dig deeper on the real estate side, when COVID had happened in 2020, and we had been 2 years into acquiring multifamilies, I had a bigger problem on my hands because real estate shot through the roof.
Yeah.
So when 2020 hit and every multifamily deal did not make sense from a numbers perspective, I was able to stumble across hard money lending, which at the time, when I was just beginning to dabble in accumulating Bitcoin at a high level, I said, hey, I thought I figured out the smartest thing in the world by loaning on real estate assets.
Hard money, for people who may not understand, it's just a higher interest rate, and you basically...
It's asset-based lending. So no credit scores required, right? Nobody needs to show their financials. It's strictly based off the asset that they're trying to acquire. And we lend up to 70% on the value of the asset, right? So, and please, viewers, don't judge me, but my initial genius model was I thought I was going to lend on some of the properties at a higher loan to value than intended, with the intent to get them default and capture that real estate back at pennies on the dollar.
Sure.
Been doing it since 2020, don't have one repossession. So it's just been a consistent, 12% a month, and that's that. But again, when you're factoring in inflation, my money is pretty much stagnant.
Well, I'll also add to the element that you talked about earlier about dealing with the people.
Exactly. Well,
or unless you have a property management company.
Luckily enough, I have two of the biggest hard money guys are both my partners here in Tampa. Both, kids I'm friends with and work with, and they handle the majority of the day to day. But yeah, like no calls for toilets, leaky toilets, or late on rent. And don't get me wrong, it's been fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the way I've structured and it's kind of my claim to fame from mixing conservative with BTC was I took the value in mortgages that we have with real estate and placed that into hard money. So this way, I was lucky enough, we bought our house in 2019 for 2.6% interest rate.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I just took, owed like $1 million and some change on the house. So
you have a beautiful place. I saw. Oh my gosh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah. No, again, another place that we don't own. It owns us.
Yeah.
I work for it. There's always something over there. My wife wonders why I don't reach my full potential. It's because I'm out here doing gardening. Yeah. I'm a New York boy. I've never even changed a light bulb before I owned that place. Now here I am with ladders all over the place. It's a disaster. But again, again, because I am a product of 2008, do have that like deep seated, it could all go bye-bye in a minute with one wrong decision. So what I did that I thought was smart at the time was I took the money that we owed in mortgages and placed that into hard money. So this way that could satisfy that I don't have to lose sleep overnight at how am I going to cover the mortgage. I will pay that off forever. But then every other dollar outside of that I earn is going to Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And that has been the only tool that has given me the hope that I'm able to catch my wife.
It gives you peace, huh?
Peace. I mean, it's the first time you're ever, and what most people don't understand about Bitcoin that I want to bring home, it's the first time you'll ever truly own your capital, right? And it's the saying, not your keys, not your crypto, right? And I've gotten burned there too. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the Celsius company, but I lost about $500K in that bankruptcy, a couple Bitcoin and about 100 Ethereum there. So that was the last time I ever gave somebody else my crypto for staking purposes to generate a yield. From that point on, and thank God, because at one point I was so high on Celsius because they were providing, it was 10% monthly.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was crazy. And so at that point, I was so high on it, I almost put everything into it because I was able to, you know, generate a ridiculous amount of passive income just off of that. But obviously, you know, don't take the free lunch, folks.
Mhm.
You know, a couple months later, they were, and for you guys, just to backtrack that you guys don't know about Celsius, Celsius was supposed to be the first proven crypto bank that promised to not leverage trade your money on the back end, not use any of your assets for their own back end deals, which all ended up being a lie.
Yeah, and that's what banks do.
Exactly. So that's why it was technically on paper was the safest place to put your crypto. Granted, the humans weren't lying, you know. So I learned, you know, took my wounds there and obviously continued to move forward. But you know, to this point, you know, if you own your crypto and you own your keys, no government could take it away from you. No entity could take it away from you. No one can rob you and take your money because your keys are in your head. So, and what most people don't understand about Bitcoin is if we do move to a Bitcoin standard of sound money, it's going to solve so many global issues. Governments aren't going to go to war anymore if they have to use their Bitcoin. They go to war because they could print cash.
So the issue with the idea and concept of the Bitcoin is there's only, like you said earlier, only a finite amount of it,
Exactly.
right? So the idea of having to use it for something that's nonsensical, these stupid wars that go on, you know, so that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, it will, and most people don't understand the harmony Bitcoin will bring if it's incorporated as
So
the
there's
global reserve.
so many ancillary, I guess, aspects of it that we, as the lay people who don't understand it, we have no knowledge of this stuff.
And this is the thing most people don't understand. When you talk about Bitcoin, everyone kind of shrugs it off because they're like, oh, he's just doing it because he's in early and he wants me to invest so it could pump up his bags. Not the slightest, right? Like you could put 20 million bucks in there today. It's not going to move a nickel for my Bitcoin. You know, it's the fact that I believe in the protocol so much that the problems it solves for society and it evens the playing field for all people involved. That like, if you put your money, if you put $10,000 in a savings account today and waited 20 years, you're in a heap of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
You put $10,000 in Bitcoin today, I'd put my life on the line that in 20 years, you're in a much better position than at 10K in savings.
Yeah.
And you know, I again, don't get me wrong. I'm not, you know, I did my fair share of selling on the Bitcoin side, like last cycle when it hit, you know, 69K. And I was sure than anyone that this was the future at that point. I'd obviously gotten all my friends and family in, all to take that ride with me down to 25K. And I remember that was the first time I was like sick to my stomach.
Well, you also felt probably responsible.
So responsible.
Yeah.
So responsible.
And then when it went up to almost 100, if they stayed.
They all stayed. Thank
Yeah.
God. I mean, you know, luckily me being the salesman I am got everybody to stay, but it was just the constant coaching of guys, you don't understand what it is. Like it's coming back. And it's the same thing even with the most recent drop today from 109 to 73, right? I mean, everybody wrote it off as dead again. Listen, in 5 years, it's going to go from 190K to 140K, and then people are going to say the same thing again. It's because they don't understand what it is.
So for the people who are listening and watching who are not involved in it at all, and they may want to engage or just try to do something, and this is not any, you know, financial advice here.
Yeah.
This is just strictly your opinions as to where you think or how, you know, what steps they could take. You know, how do you think somebody should approach something like that?
So first you have to, it's your timeline, right? If you're on retirement and you need it for 1 to 2 years, stick with your traditional finance,
Mhm.
right? I would never tell anybody bet it all on Bitcoin given that. But if you have 5-year timeline, even better 10-year timeline, the bulletproof plan to financial freedom is dollar cost averaging. I mean, it's been all over social media. They have the perfect example of a guy over the last 10 years that did $30 a day.
And that's what they do. That's what they do with the stock market.
Exactly.
It's the same thing. And for people who are watching, listening, don't know dollar cost averaging, you basically are continuously pumping, whether it goes up or down. You predictably put X amount of dollars in the same investment as time progresses, and it averages.
For sure. Well, no, and you know,
but it averages like this, hopefully.
Yeah. I just started to get my dad around to this because like I think everyone can relate that the cost of living today is so high, right? You go to a restaurant now, you know, if you pop a bottle of wine, it's $500, you know, like everything today is so much more expensive. So my bulletproof plan to investing into Bitcoin is look at your own finances, assess what your obviously your cost of living and overhead is, and then take a small percentage of your free money that you have for personal enjoyment, whatever that is, and then take a percentage of that and dollar cost averaging. Let it be your Starbucks money.
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
that $30 a day for that guy that invested over 7 years, and this is proven. Anybody can look this up.
Mhm.
His total investment over 7 years was $83,721. The real estate, the Bitcoin value today is 1.3 million. So he
That's
pretty much
incredible.
swapped 83K for 1.3 million.
Wow.
And that's just by, again, not trying to be a genius in time in the market. Now, can you, if you want to adapt a philosophy of only investing on every 30%, you know, every 30% dip, you won't go wrong there too, right? But then obviously, what if you're on vacation during one of those, you know, one of those times? It's not, the bulletproof plan is daily cost averaging in.
Well, I always use this adage in life, KISS, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
And it really applies to this as well, because you can get lost in crypto schemes. And what I mean by that is that they have programs out there, people know about this, where you can put it on autopilot. And when the price goes up or the price goes down and hits certain points, you know, buy, sell.
Yeah.
Or you got day traders doing all that type of stuff too. Okay, but like you said, you want to go play golf, you want to do something, boom, boom. Oh, you just missed this run, or you missed that run. But what you're saying, keep it simple, dollar cost averaging, incrementally. It's kind of like when people take money out of their account for savings, they just take it out, but they're going in a 0.5% interest account, whatever the hell the banks are paying now. So instead you got the upsell of potentially really growing.
So let me tell you this, let me give you a golden nugget for Bitcoin. So in Bitcoin, you know, and obviously all crypto, there's a site called Etherscan that pretty much has all the analytics on every single crypto transaction. Obviously, the big boys are now in the game, right? You got BlackRock, you got Fidelity. And what these guys are able to do is pull that data and able to see when retail enters the market, right? And they also show that on with the ETFs, right? They're able to prove through the purchase orders of the ETFs that those are retail buyers. How, you ask? Because the buying orders are in odd numbers, you know? Whereas when conventional, you know, companies they buy it in blocks of 50, 100, you know, 20, where all the ETF purchases are like 1.6 or, you know, 5.4, just odd numbers that show it's not professional money, it's retail money.
And
So
when you mean retail, you mean consumer.
Consumer money. They're all using it through the ETFs, their side, because you got to think the average person doesn't have a ton of money just sitting around to be able to play ball. They do have money in your conventional, you know, money market accounts and investment portfolios that they're able to free up a little fraction to get a bite. And that's all that's nibbled in the space today. But once the smart money comes to play, and let me just give you an even more macro point of view, because I don't pretend to be the smartest. I am one of the guys, I am able to trade Bitcoin, which is a very hard thing to do. You know, in today's market, I think there was just a stat that showed like the market's gone up 46%, but 90% of the people in the market have lost 30%. But it's because people don't got, you know, the ball, so to speak, to stay in there for the long run. And once you start leverage trading, it's a whole nother level of risk and scare from there. But, you know, when you start looking at the big picture of crypto, there's 900 trillion total global assets, right? I think about 3 trillion of that's cash. And they're just turning on the money printers in every government today. So let's just say Bitcoin's what, 2 trillion bucks? I mean, let's just say we take 10% of that 900 trillion, you're looking at 100x, right? So, I mean, again, to my core, I believe that Bitcoin is our vehicle because it's the apex asset. It's the one that's going to, you know, obviously never create more of. It's going to be the one that continues to accumulate money as the money supply grows. And it's the best performing asset of our time and going to continue to trend in that direction. Michael Saylor, one of the gurus in the space, has mapped out a mathematical plan that shows that this will perform 30% a year over the next 20 years. His bear case is $3 million a coin. His bull case is 13 million. His base case is $13 million a coin, and his bear case is $43 million a coin. Either of those numbers work for me.
Yeah.
You know, but my belief, and again, this is not financial advice, is we'll see $1 million a coin in less than 5 years.
Yeah. Wow.
Just because, again, like you could already see our government specifically making a move from.
Yeah, there seems to be an embracing of it more so than before.
Well, there's a problem we can't solve. I mean, the government understands. I mean, you know, even with, you know, a pal, you know, we have a problem that in order to keep our system alive, they have to keep printing, which devalues all
everything.
of our money.
Yeah.
And it's really not fair to the people that work hard for theirs that don't, and even especially if you work hard and you don't make the type of money that allows for passive investing, you are stuck on that hamster wheel.
Oh, yeah.
And Bitcoin evens the playing field. It's a game that everybody could win if they have the right timeline. That's the most important fact. If you want to make a quick buck, don't touch Bitcoin. It's not for you. You know, go into something else. Go hit the casino. You know,
it's all risk tolerance, like anything else in life. So that's good. All right, I had you on a long time with crypto. We only touched on it. I know we can go longer, and you promised that you'll let me do it again with you, because we'll do Bitcoin and talk about all these other things in crypto. Let me just kind of circle a little bit back to your health transformation, because to me, which I have such passion about, you know, we talk business, we talk finance, we talk about, you know, money, accumulating things, houses, whatever. Yes, that's really important. You had challenges with your health. Yes, my wife was there, instrumental, but at the end of the day, you're accountable for you. And so you had to make conscious decisions to change. And I briefly had a chance to speak with your brother, and he's making some changes as well. And I understand this concept, and a lot of people go through this concept from a cultural perspective, in that we're all raised in certain environments, and then we get into these traditional type habits that we all do. And sometimes we don't realize that the habits that we do are negative, and they're hurting us. And we don't necessarily view them as negative habits because we've done them all the time. And it's part of our life, whether it be going out with buddies and having a couple pops and just laughing it off, or going, you know, I remember when I used to play golf years ago, I played golf. I wouldn't be a problem to have, you know, you drinking beers, Coors Light, or whatever you're drinking, you're done with like a 6-pack or a 12-pack with 18 holes, smoking a cigar, then you go in, you sit down, throw bullshit, drink some more and the whole thing, and then go home. I mean, you know, it's like, I sweated it out, whatever it was. But, you know, those behaviors, you figured it out a little earlier in your life. I figured it out later, but you've made some changes. But and you still struggle. We're human. We make mistakes. We go back. But tell us about the mind shift. Like what number one, what caused it? And then number two, how were you able to extradite yourself from, we've been talking a lot about this hamster wheel, this hamster wheel of life. Well,
listen, for starters, your wife was the catalyst for me. I don't know why.
But you had to see her somehow. So what happened?
For sure. Well, I mean, I got sick, you know, like I said, when I was drinking like a fish, you know, partying like an animal. You know, I definitely not taking care of myself at all. And it actually started, I had a seizure in Vegas. After we actually had a birthday party at my house for one of my friend's moms. It was a crazy party. Then we hop on the red eye, go to Vegas. I get to the hotel in the morning, and I was like, let me clean up my act, because it was a business trip. So I go to take a ginger shot, like one of those wellness shots. And I guess the damage I had done to my body was so significant that I had altered my reaction to foods that I'd been eating my whole life. And it was just wrong time, wrong place. Popped the ginger shot and went into anaphylactic shock on the strip.
Holy crap.
So my wife had to witness that, which I'm always reminded of.
I bet.
I went down. She thought I was dead, you know, like she said I was trying to breathe for my life, you know, because I guess when you go to anesthesia, all your stuff swells up and you can't breathe. And I turned bright red and I went out. But, you know, what was even weirder from there was every doctor, had no idea what it was. They just were like, oh, you're dehydrated. I'm not dehydrated, and we could not figure it out. And it went through a series of your traditional medical system where it was a complete waste of time and money.
I can go on a tangent about that whole
and we
thing.
should.
Big pharma, medical
We
schools,
should. No, because-
protocols. That's a whole other area.
But that's why, again, I just don't trust the system anymore.
Yeah.
Because when you spend the type of money I spend on, I was flying up to New York to see specialists because I was like, it's Florida. They don't know shit down here. Like
that's how we were raised up north. It's the same thing. It's Florida.
Yeah.
It's the sun. They're not smart.
Yeah, they barely went to school. They don't even have
Exactly.
any credentials down there. But it ended up being that the entire system is flawed. So I had figured, started to learn through trial and error that I can't trust anyone. Especially like, some of the recommendations I were getting was pushing me backwards, like as far as like things that they were telling me to eat and do. And I'm like, no, these foods aren't working. So it wasn't until like, I came into your wife as kind of a last Hail Mary, which, again, I was introduced to your wife as my wife's Botox lady initially, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And as much as I enjoyed her, I never had thought she was going to be the one to save me, you know? But again, back to it doesn't matter what you are, what your background is, it's who's willing to do the work. And your wife clearly did the work, educated herself on all of the areas conventional medicine doesn't. And she was able to find the pockets and areas for me that I needed to fix. Now, one of the things is because of me and your wife's relationship, she's a straight shooter. She literally pulled me aside. And after doing the first round of blood work, she said, you're going to die, soon. So if you don't figure it out, I guess like the way my blood work was terrible, what I had in there was like, I guess my, I guess you're able to tell like there was stuff in my blood that was like,
I'm a firm believer in blood work. It's the window to the soul, so to speak. I have it done all the time too. I mean, I talk about, I'm on testosterone replacement therapy. I'm on peptides. I'll talk about it to anybody. I'm a firm believer in this. But you need to get an idea of what's going on in you. So she did that with you,
for
obviously.
Sure. And, obviously it's easy for my wife to tell me, not to drink. And I'm telling her like, of course you don't want me to drink. Makes sense. I understand. I like to go out and have fun with my friends. But it was your wife's perspective that was like, listen, if you don't stop drinking, the show ends. And you have kids now, and that's kind of the moment for me with kids. My journey with kids isn't as, easy as most. Like when we had first had kids, it didn't really hit me right away. It took the kids to get to like 1 or 2 for me to start building relationships with them.
I have a close friend in the UK that went through the same thing. He kind of viewed his son, he's about your age, and he viewed his son as kind of like this alien. It wasn't until he got it past a couple of years that he actually could connect, and he had guilt about it. Is that kind of what you went through?
No, because again, back to my trauma, my trauma going up was, aside from not wanting to get married, I was dead set on not having kids. I was like, I didn't want to put my kids through that. Like, God forbid, because I know what I'm capable of as a human. I'm not perfect, and very selfish prior to kids. So I was under the assumption that if I were to have kids, I would just fuck them up. But again, it takes a beautiful person in your life like my wife to be able to get me past that hump, show it. Now I couldn't imagine life without it. Yeah. So, you don't know what you don't know. I'm smart enough to understand I'm not that smart, that like I had some flaws and some mental obstacles to overcome. But again, the way your wife kind of, introduced me to how easy it is to make change by incorporating the peptides and incorporating the diet. I mean, granted, my medical issues forced me to change my diet because I had to cut out gluten, dairy, soy, pretty much everything great. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I think, she shows the picture. I was 250 pounds, just looked miserable, not happy.
And for people who are listening and people who are watching, it wasn't one magic pill. It wasn't just, don't eat fast food and your life will change. Yeah. I mean, it really took, you had to work it, right? You had to accept it and work it.
Yeah. Well, you also have to understand that the system, it started with my hatred towards the medical system.
Yeah.
Once I started to hate the medical system, I realized, oh my God, our food system's poisoned too.
Yeah.
So it was just a series of understanding that like, oh my God, the world's actually not meant to help you.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah. It's crazy.
It's crazy. They basically want us sick.
Well, now we understand why.
Yeah, exactly.
There's money at the end of that trade. I bet a lot of that money is buying BTC.
Yeah.
So I don't want to contribute towards that anymore. But that's exactly it. You realize that the world's a game. Everybody's in it for their own benefit. And unfortunately, our health system is built to work against you. Unless you have the self-discipline to be able to monitor yourself and make the right decisions. I mean, prior to this change in my life, my diet was horrendous. I mean, I thought a good dinner was chicken parm, you know? Like I thought that was covering all the food with pasta, you know? And I'm like, oh, I'm full, I love it. That was what I ate for most of my college career, you know, was like all that. Now, strictly lean meats, you know, grass-fed, organic only.
So you went through you actually went through a thought process, and you consciously made a decision that you were going to make changes, and you had your aha moments. What for people who are watching and people who are listening to this, they may be going through a challenge right now. It's overwhelming to a lot of people. What were some of the things that you did to kind of get your momentum started?
Yeah, well, it starts with your desire to want to change, right? Once I had that, and I had your wife's tools, it was seeing the progress for me that became addictive, right? Like once, you know, I was never a big gym guy before this, you know, always played sports my whole life, but really tried to get through with the minimal amount of weight.
I've seen you doing more of the core stuff. I saw that stuff on Instagram.
I'm into it now.
Frustrating stuff.
Yeah. But again, so that, you know, that transition, like seeing the way, you know, I look at myself in the mirror was something that I had never experienced in years, you know? And I've been there before. In high school, I was the kid that would show up to the cafeteria with my shirt off, you know, like trying to flex for the girls. But once I got to college and I got my girl, all personal accountability kind of went out the window for how I look. Cause I was like, wait, if I'm married and I have my wife and I'm not going anywhere else, why do I need to look?
So it happens to a lot of people.
Exactly. And I fell for that bait. I fell for that trap where and then you blink and you're 250 pounds, you're disgusted with what you see in the mirror. And you realize that everything that your mind's telling you is based off an old version of you that's not true today. And that was the big moment for me. Cause I in my head, I'm high and mighty, you know, I talk a good game for myself, but when you look at the mirror and the game doesn't match the view, it was a real aha moment, like get your shit together.
When I made my change, and I strongly believe in this, when you physically change, you're mentally changing. Your brain, when you change from a mindset mentally that you're going to take care of yourself and you're going to be personally accountable to your health and yourself physically, it is a huge shift. Because I also am a firm believer, and I lived it personally, clarity kicks in even more so, and opportunity in business, in life also changes. Yeah. I teased my team about this podcast and this platform. When I started this podcast 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, I did it because I wanted to lean into the uncomfortable. Well, what I mean by that is that I never knew anything about podcasts or this stuff, but I was on a podcast in the UK, and make a long story short, I enjoyed it and said, okay, well, I know some interesting people. Let me try something that's not legal. You know, let's try something outside. Well, why are you doing that? You're an experienced lawyer. Why are you doing it? Because I want to kind of expand myself. I want to challenge myself. But as I progressed through this process and better, you know, in combination with my health and taking care of myself, I tell the team, I go, it's there. Something is revealing itself to me what we're going to do with this platform. I don't know what it is. And then as my follower base kind of grew, it's small, but it's kind of growing.
No,
and more
you're
people
on fire.
It's starting now. But what happens is that, holy shit, it's revealing itself. There's a lot of people like us that have had success in one area or the other, but not holistically, not everything.
Yeah.
So how do we help these people? What do we do? Like, how, you know what? Let's talk about it. Let's bring it to the forefront. And so for me, it was, okay, what do I do with this now? Okay, let me set up a membership. Let me set up a community. So that's what we're working on for this community. But the point that you brought up, I went through, the farther you get away from that sick and tired feeling, from that past, the stronger you become, because you recognize the difference of that version of yourself,
Yeah.
and you no longer want to be that person. You become much more, let's just say, empowered to not, and it doesn't even become like, listen, you may run, like my wife and I sometimes, we'll have a glass of champagne. I go, I really don't want a glass of, come on, let's have a toast. So we'll have a toast and they get a little giggly, feel good. Okay, well, let's have one more. You know what's going to happen if we have one more? You know, so it's like
Get
that
the
feeling.
bottle.
I go, oh, then before you know it, if you finish the bottle, then you're like, holy shit, why did I even do that? So, but as time progresses, you don't even want that because you know that feeling. And you figured it out a little earlier. I mean, you had a life experience that you went through, but most people don't figure that out at all or figure it out later in life. Because as it is, when we get older, we don't metabolize like we used to, which is huge. But the farther you get away from those negative things, the stronger you become. And you don't know how good you could feel until you get rid of them.
You touched on it earlier. It's the spiritual element. The more you become in tune with your soul and who you are as a person, and you stop using outside validation to dictate your actions, is when you become superhuman.
And then people aspire to be like you.
Exactly.
I bet like a lot of your buddy, and even you influence your brother, right? So a lot of people would be like, holy shit, he's changed. What the hell happened? What's he doing? How'd that happen?
To influence my brother is huge because he's always been the, mecca for health and wellness in our house. He's, as an athlete, football player that, had a run at the NFL for a while. He was somebody I always looked up to, but that was also like, weirdly enough, one of my reasons. Well, he's the one in our family now that could look good and be good. And I'm just the older brother now that's going to, take care of everyone. And I don't need to focus on me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off that as well, another, aha moment was when I was in those in that medical issue, having to rely on other doctors to save your situation was like, for me, the hardest thing to swallow, because I realized if I don't fix it myself, to have to rely on these idiots, so to speak, I was like, never again. I'm never putting myself in that position. And that was where it's like, clean it up, figure it out, and, be the best version of you.
I love it. Well, I had you on a long time. We can go on and on about so many things. But
when we come back, I want to touch on the spiritual element because I have a whole case study on how that all ties into.
It really is important because for me, frankly, I think that, I do bring it up and sometimes I'm fighting it and I'm like, well, it's going to reveal itself. It's going to reveal itself. And what I mean by that, I'm kind of talking abstractly, but what I mean is that I was doing all this stuff for a couple of years and some people would be questioning, why are you doing this? And I wasn't doing it for money. Yeah. And that's the thing people don't, I was doing this because I enjoyed it and I was meeting so many interesting people and it was filling a cup for me. It's very hard to explain, but as it progressed and then when I was like this, I was telling my team, it's going to reveal itself sooner or later. And Jeremiah, who's filming us, I would tell him this. I go, I could kind of see it, what to do with this platform, but God will show me. He'll show me. And then boom, I have this epiphany of, no, we're going to pay it back. We're going to create a network of us, basically. Yeah. As it is, we're pariahs as entrepreneurs. They look at you like you're crazy. I mean, everybody I have spoken to as entrepreneurs could share stories about how they can go to dinner with somebody who's working 9 to 5 or working a job with somebody and in a career, and you tell them about, well, I wasn't able to make payroll this week, or we didn't pay ourselves this week, or we had to do this week, and they go, why are you doing that? Why are you even wasting your time doing that? Well, when the hook is in you, you have no choice.
Exactly. No, it's so true. I mean, it and like you said, there's so many things, so many success stories of other entrepreneurs that when they start, they had no real game plan, right? The truth and what it manifests to comes in through the work. And
the journey, right?
The journey. And most people don't get that. Like, you have to jump off the boat first to be able to figure it out, And that's where that's why unfortunately so many people don't get to the golden nugget, because they are just so many what ifs, what can happen, what can go bad, etc. Whereas like the go-getters, let's just do this and figure out how we can incorporate as much value. You take that approach, and I believe your main concept is providing value to others in the universe. Mm-hmm. Money follows 10 out of 10 times.
Yeah. Not to mention that feeling of giving back, which you can't put a price on.
For sure.
Love it. Jesse, it was a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Loved it. Thanks for watching us, and remember to follow us on social media and keep it pro to pro.
Pro to pro.
That's all for today's episode of Pro to Pro. If this podcast resonates with you and you'd like to be part of our membership network, be sure to check out the Pro to Pro Collective. Please like, subscribe, and follow us on social media for more content like this. Thanks for listening and watching, and remember to keep it pro to pro.